I think it's pretty safe to say that students with disabilities are often excluded from activities that normally other students would get to engage in. But that doesn't mean that they should be excluded from accessing an effective education. And this has a lot to do with positioning, but not specifically by the students, but by the teachers. In positioning, I took the definition from one of our lectures where Wortham describes positioning as an event of identification in which a recognizable category of identity gets explicitly or implicitly applied to an individual in an event that takes place across seconds, minutes, or hours. So basically, just to sum that up, it's looking at someone and recognizing something about them, and basically that's become how, like, you identify them. Like, that is their identifier. And you start to pair them with, like, a certain category. And a lot of the times the teachers, they see certain kids with disabilities and they treat them differently. And the other students see that. And so then they treat that student differently because they're modeling the teacher. And a lot of that leads to exclusion from activities and just being in the classroom. It's not a warm environment that they deserve. And I think that's really where intersectionality comes in, because I know, and people with disabilities know, that a disability does not define a person. But often people choose to see a disability instead of a person, which is really sad. And intersectionality, it takes all those different parts of a person, their race, their gender, things they believe in, their moral values, their sexual orientation, everything that makes a person who they are. And it just shows that there's so much more. You can't identify a person based on their disability or what you see about them. And I think that there's a lot of biases when it comes to excluding those students. And sometimes it can even be a mixture of things. So not just their disability, but sometimes it has to do with their race or their gender, and that mixed with their disability. And one of the things that was really interesting to me was the Rosemary Allen TED Talk, where she really just talked about, like, the hypocrisy behind when teachers yell at students or try to discipline them and their ways. And I think one of the examples that she used was when a mother is yelling at her daughter, "Don't yell at your sister," but she's yelling at her daughter about not yelling at her sister. And so there's just, like, that hypocrisy there, where you say, "Don't do this," and then you go and do that same thing that you just told them not to do. And that to me was really interesting, because I feel like a lot of the times teachers who don't have a lot of that patience or are not trained on how to work with kids with disabilities, they often are, "Don't do this, don't do that," and sometimes the person with the disability can't help it, and because they don't know better. And I think that's really difficult for both the student and the teacher, because they're not equipped to deal with that, and they don't really know how, which I think is the fault of the school that should be training their teachers on how to deal with those students. And another thing she said is that that I found really interesting was that children were being punished for normal childlike behaviors. Children have a lot of energy. They can't sit still for long amounts of time, you know? I think she said that she was labeled as perverted as a child, and she was also labeled as destructive and a bunch of other labels, just for engaging in normal childlike behaviors. Not everything that a child does is to be destructive or to purposely like hurt someone else or to just be that disruption. But often it's like these frameworks that these teachers have in their minds of, well, that kid's not behaving, so just send them away. And I think my suggestions for like future teachers, and just all educators in general, is being like open-minded and also taking that extra time and getting that training, even on your own time, because working with those children with disabilities and learning how to have a more inclusive classroom is really going to affect not just how the students with disabilities learn, but how all the students learn. Yeah.